actually taken a look at some of the work at Patchwork Nation, so it's really fantastic stuff. He has also worked with Newsweek. He's worked with the Project for Excellence in Journalism, and he has written for The Economist, Columbia Journalism Review, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. You even worked for. And he can tell you more about his background and what he does. So I'm going to turn it over to Dante. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. That's enough of that. Thanks for having me here. It's warm here, really warm. I want to talk to you a little bit today. This is kind of adapted. I'm going to zip through this slide thing. We'll go through the slides and talk about them. I did this for like a speech, but it wasn't aimed at journalism. So I want to talk to you a little bit more today as a journalist, and talk about how I came up with the idea behind Patchwork Nation, how it works, and I think, you know, how I hope it's an idea that I had. I hope a lot of other people, and you guys, the next generation, you're going to take this and you'll look back on this and think how stupid it was, and how brilliant your ideas are, which is great. But this is an early step, I think, at least, in trying to get journalism on the right playing field in terms of understanding the way we have to look at the country in a different way. Data is a very big part of it. Before I begin this really quickly too, just so you understand where I come from. I'm not a data person. I've never been a data person. I guess I've become one. I guess I'm kind of an honorary data person, honorary data geek. But I've just been, I started as a print person. My background is in print. I came out of college. I interned at newspapers around the state of Michigan. I grew up in Michigan. I went out and did an internship for a newspaper in Washington, D.C. I went up and I worked for a newsletter in Washington, D.C. I went up and worked for Newsweek when it was still just a magazine back in the olden days. I was at Newsweek when the World Wide Web just really came into existence. Especially older. And data is something I've come to later in my career, and I came to it in a lot of ways. One of those ways was through the Project for Excellence in Journalism. The Project for Excellence in Journalism is an effort funded by Pew that essentially looks at what's happening in the world of journalism in all sorts of different ways. What's happening to the content, advertising, audience, all those things. And it is inherently number driven because it's, you know, how many readers did they have last year, how many readers did they have this year? What did the ad dollars look like last year? What did the ad dollars look like this year? And I think through that, I became very interested in what you could do with numbers. I was kind of, again, a convert to working with data. And I'm going to explain a little bit how I got there by going through some of these slides. Yeah, maybe I will. Maybe I won't. There we go. I spent a lot of time as a regular journalist writing for the Christian Science Monitor. I was on staff there in 2001. And writing for a whole host of different publications. You guys heard of some of them. And a lot of what I did was I'd go to different places around the country, and I'd write about the place. I'd write profiles of places and try to understand what the heck was going on in the place. And I ate a lot of bad diners, and I drank a lot of bad coffee, and I stayed at a lot of bad hotels. And if you do that enough, if you go to enough places, you start to make connections in your head, right? You start to understand that just as a journalist, not as a data journalist. You start to, you're sitting at the Crappy Diner in Tennessee, and you're like, this is a lot like the Crappy Diner I was in Minnesota, and that place is a lot like this place. There are a lot of similarities. And you start drawing these things together. And as journalists, we do this. We do a lot of traveling as journalists. You end up doing this just because it's human nature to start to draw those kind of connections between places. And it really helps you to see the different kinds of place in the United States, and you get to understand how complicated it is and how it functions in all these different ways. And then every 4 years we have an election, and all those understanding we have about the United States blows down to this. This is the 2004 map for Kerry versus Bush, and the red states and the blue states. And this is the way we have come to understand America, and we know this is wrong. As journalists, we know this is wrong because we travel to all these different places. You get out at all, and you know that there's a lot of red America that has blue patches, including Texas, and there's a lot of blue America that can be pretty red, including get into upstate New York. It's not at all in New York City; it's world away. And what I wanted to do was get past that. Journalists look at this now. We do this blue and red thing. We're doing it again now. And it's not that blue and red is inherently wrong. I mean, you have to have a way to tell final score on election night, so you got to know who won, right? So some states go blue, and some states go red, and that's how we figure out who the president is. But we know this is wrong, so we try to break things down to demographics. And a lot of times we talk about this, we talk about whether or not Mitt Romney is winning women, for instance. Because women, you know, they're only 50% of the population, so they obviously have a lot in common. All the women in here are the same, obviously, because you're women. So we can talk about you that way. And we know that's not really right, because when you break women out into different categories, you have suburban women with, you know, this lady here who lives in this nice house and has a fabulous, you know, family, wonderful children and all that. And then you have this like hipster woman in New York City who goes clubbing at night and has a really great time living there. And then you have this woman who, you know, works in the farm. These are all women, right? These are all women that we talk about in election parliaments. And these women all have very different ways of seeing the world. They live in very different places, and they understand the world in very different ways. And we try to get around this by assigning all these people names, right? We try to say, like, well, we know that it's not really just women. So we have soccer moms, and we have NASCAR dads, and we have Catholics, or we have lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transsexuals. We have these groups, but all these things miss the point that I found as a journalist traveling around the country, which is place really matters. Where you live, the reality you experience every day where you live really matters. And I saw it when I grew up outside Detroit. Detroit's a very blue place. It's blue. It's only about 40 miles from Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor is also very blue. If you were to look at them in terms of an election map, they look very similar in terms of the how blue they are. They're completely different. Detroit is an old, hulking metropolis that's really struggling to get by a large minority population. Ann Arbor is overwhelmingly white. It is wealthy. It is hyper-educated. They're very different. This is true with Red America as well. Fargo, which is pretty red, it's about as red as you're going to get, and the county around it is very red, and so is Orange County. And these places are inherently different. We need to find a way of breaking them into different kinds of place. And that's what Patchwork Nation does. That's what I've been trying to do for the last 4 years. I came up with this idea back in 2008. And this map is, this is the Obama map, by the way, from 2012. Some of these states are going to flip, right? This is the 2008 map. The 2012 map is going to look a little different. Indiana's going to be red, you know, in all likelihood. I don't know what's going to happen in Florida. A lot of the states in Nevada, there's a good chance it's going to go red. But the fundamental nature of the country is going to change. It's a couple votes here or there. It's not all of a sudden that Indiana used to be Democratic and now it's all of a sudden going to be Republican again. It never really changed. There has to be a way of breaking the country down better, and that's why I do what I do. And what we do with Patchwork Nation that uses data is we basically took the country, instead of using states, we got every bit of data we could about every county in America. There's a lot of data out there, a lot of it's from the census. It's everything from age to income to occupation to faith, race, religion. Religion's a big component of what we do. And we used it to break the 3,100 counties in America into 12 different kinds of place. And I'll go through them on the site as we wrap this thing up, as I wrap up this slide presentation. But what you see when you see the country this way is you see that, you know, a lot of things that I notice as a journalist, right? You know, so, you know, southern Illinois down here is this red area, this is called Service, this red color. But it's a lot like northern Michigan. It really is. There are some similarities, obviously, because it's a little more of a southern field out in southern Illinois. But these places are small town communities that kind of operate with a lot of people that live on the margins, a lot of people don't have health insurance, much lower incomes than most people, than the average county, median county income in the United States. Those dark blue areas out there in the west are the Mormon outposts. We gave the Mormons their own community type just because we originally didn't do it, actually. We originally had them linked, grouped with evangelicals, but when you look at the country this way, and you think about communities this way, it just didn't work. There were so many fundamental differences between the way these yellow evangelical communities down here, the way they feel, the way they vote about things, and the way these people live, and the way they kind of their everyday reality. They're so different. what you get when you look at the country this way is just a much more nuanced understanding of how the country really works. And it's all about data. Data underlies everything that we do here. And I have a slide in here just to show that these beige areas are what we call, those are largely suburban counties called the money burbs. And if you look, some of them are very close to these red service worker centers. They're very different places. And they neighbor, some of them neighbor each other. The counties border each other. The money burbs are, of all the types we have in Patrick Nation, the wealthiest. They're among the best educated. They're not terribly diverse, but they're more diverse than these service worker centers are. And the way they have experienced everything, from the recession to the housing crisis, everything has been different than what they've experienced in the service worker centers. And this shows in a really kind of fundamental way what's happened to these places over the last 30 years and how the country is actually really coming apart at this county level. It's way more than just rent. It's about the way these people live their lives, how they make their livings, and what's happened in these places. This is the wealthy money burbs here. These yellow areas, this yellow bar here, and the yellow bar for the service worker centers. This is what the median household income was in these county types back in 1980. This is what it was in 2010. This is the median family income. And as you can see, the burbs have actually gained. They're one of the only community types that have gained in capitalization. They've actually seen their median family incomes grow by about $4,000. At the same time, the service worker centers, they've seen their incomes drop by about $3,000. They weren't terribly close to begin with, but they're actually going in different directions. And they're going in different directions because the way people make their living in these service worker centers, the way they do, when you get into all the data, it's just fundamentally different. And I'll take a question.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
I'm just curious. I assume this is adjusted for inflation. And are these $2010?
These are everything was adjusted to inflation in $2010. Yeah. And this is median family income. And we did, so we did this for all the county types. I'll show you what we did. I should have pulled it up. I'll show you. Get it on the laptop really quickly. We did this for the Atlantic. And it's really interesting because when you look at the country this way, you begin to understand the challenges of governing this country, right? Another example, these pink counties here are what we call tractor country in Patrick Nation. These are places that rely heavily on agriculture. And, it's actually really important to make these differentiations. We think of rural America as one thing, and there definitely is. I would say that when I look at all the data, there's a massive divide between urban and rural America. They're going in really different directions. But it's not all the same. This is rural America, but this is rural America as with an economy that's driven by agriculture. And it's really interesting when you look at, these numbers are old now, this is when I did this, but the gap is about the same. This was as of October last year, what the unemployment rate was nationally in the country and what it was in tractor country. So, in tractor country, in these rural communities, they never had a housing bubble, so the foreclosure crisis, even though it's a very big story nationally, for these people, they don't experience it. It hasn't really impacted their lives anymore. There has not been a foreclosure crisis in tractor country. Unemployment rates are up, but it's not the same. In fact, there are a lot of jobs in agriculture right now. I mean, you're gonna have to have some technical knowledge, some skills, but there are a lot of jobs out there, more than in journalism. These places right here are called the evangelical epicenters. I showed you them before. And the interesting thing about this is you think about the recession and what's happening in the country right now is these places really, they don't care. They really don't. They've been pounded by the recession because these places have lower than average median household incomes, lower than average education levels. But you know something? They don't vote on any of that stuff. They really don't. They're going to vote Republican. That's the way they vote, and they vote that way because other issues matter to them more than the economy. And the economy may be the most important issue to you, it may be the most important issue to me. Not always, but sometimes. But to them, it's not. And the idea that you're going to reach those voters or how those voters are going to respond to something, it's really different than how they're going to respond to these wealthy suburban areas in these kind of counties that I call campus and careers, places with a lot of college students, young professionals, very different than the service worker centers. When you see the country this way, you understand how it's really difficult to govern because all these places want different things, right? You know, the bottom line is these, you know, these places here, these money birds, they really are driven by the economy. And actually, they have not had pain as bad as the rest of the country, but in some ways, they're a little sensitive to it because people there have a lot of money and they don't like when things aren't going well. They particularly don't like when they're not going well in the stock market because they look at things like the 401k and get very upset about that. So they get, you know, they're very tied to the economy, even though they're not very affected by it. These evangelical centers are very affected by the economy and have been hammered very hard in the recession, but don't really care about it. And then you get up to these places like the service worker centers, those red areas. They've been hit hard in the recession, and they do care about it. But they have other things that motivate them too. And you can get through all that stuff, get to all of it through looking at a lot of the data. Well, when I started doing this project, the initial idea was it was 2008. There was an election coming up, and everybody knew it was going to be a big deal. And that's when I started doing this. We quickly realized that this wasn't, I mean, it's great for looking at the election. I can show you really some interesting stuff we've seen just in the Republican primaries using this. But when you take all the data we did to create these types, now I can't do this by myself, I'm just a student journalist, but I work with statisticians that help me. I worked with a statistician at the University of Maryland who helped me create this typology. And it's, you know, it's held up remarkably well. I have to say, I went by and told him what I had in mind. Like I said, I'm not a data journalist. I've kind of developed it. But I went to him with this idea I had. Look, I travel all around the country. I see a lot of similarities. There has to be some way of quantifying this. And, you know, we took all these data points and we created this typology. And it's great for looking at everything. It really is. It's terrific for looking at unemployment rates. The unemployment rates in these places are really different. Gas prices, which is something I did really recently again. Something I did for the site. I partnered with the NewsHour and I do some stuff with the Wall Street Journal. But the interesting thing with, say, gas prices is, so this is look at what's happening in gas prices between January and March. And you know, when you look at the hike is I mean, it's a little higher in some places, but it's up everywhere. And the tendency would be to think like, well, gas prices are a big deal everywhere. I mean, because it's up everywhere. And I think that may be true, but some places, when you start looking at the data, these people in these service worker centers, they have to drive to do everything, right? They have to drive because nothing's really very close. So everything is a 10 or 15 mile drive to town for a lot of these people, right? Tractor country. There's something I wrote about in this piece, tractor country. Think of everything that's involved in an agricultural economy, right? That runs on fuel, where they have to have cheap gas, or it's better for them to have cheap gas. Meanwhile, if you live in these big city places that we call the industrial metropolis, which I live in DC, I don't really notice an increase in gas prices that much because I don't drive. I really don't. I mean, we have a car, but we don't use, I mean, we have a car, I take the kids to school in the morning, but I take the train to work. I take the metro to work, and so does my wife. And, you know, it makes you understand these, it gives you a whole different way of looking at, using data to create these types gives you a whole different way to look at data. And once you have that way of looking at data, you have a whole different way of looking at all sorts of issues. I think that Patchwork Nation was originally created as a way of looking at the 2008 election and what was going to happen. It is a remarkable tool because of what's happening in the country right now for understanding what's happening politically, economically, culturally. Because what's going to happen in the next 10 years, we're just at the beginning of it, right? Things are going to get really interesting over the next decade. Like, if you think that this wave of populism you're seeing now is interesting, this is just the beginning. Because what's happened economically in this country, and this is what when we looked at these incomes over 30 years, the country's kind of been pulling apart for a while, right? The way the economy works now, there are more, the line between winners and losers, and places that are going to do okay in the new economy and places that aren't going to do so well in the new economy, is going to play a big role in how these places evolve and how they change, and how the country ultimately evolves. And it's data is a huge part of this, and but it's not the end. It's the beginning in a way of trying to understand what's going on in the country. we've been able to take all the Republican primaries so far, and we're able to do them state by state on these maps, and we can look at the results county by county, which is fun. Everybody kind of likes to do that. But the interesting thing is you get down and look at these types, and you really begin to notice divides in the populace. Right? So here you have, this is Wisconsin. Romney, won Wisconsin. That was essentially the death knell of the Santorum campaign. And where did he do? What did he do? Well, he's really doing well in these wealthy suburban areas. And he did pretty well in Wisconsin already. He won it by 5 points. He did even better in Illinois. I can show you that in a second. But even though he won Wisconsin. He did very well here in these wealthy suburban areas. He did very well in these places called the industrial metropolis. It's Milwaukee in Wisconsin. But then you get out here to these service worker centers. Even in states he lost, Santorum won these places. He won it here. He won these aging, emptying nests here. And I'll show you the same thing when you get down to Illinois. Illinois was, Romney won Illinois pretty big. He won Illinois by 8 percentage points here. And he, again, kicked butt here. He just, he hammered it in Chicago. But you get out here, this is Santorum country. This is Santorum country. These evangelical communities, they're always Santorum country. So what's going on? This filter we've created for data has allowed us to see something that's happening in the Republican Party right now. Right? I got the right of, I will say, I don't know, I'm not the only person to point this out. We were there first. We were the first ones to know this was really going on. The initial talk with Santorum was what he was doing was he was winning all these cultural conservatives, which he did. He's done very well with cultural conservatives. But what you really start to look at when you look at the vote, the way we did, was you started to see this real class divide. And it's just become, this is open, it's working. It's coming eventually. It'll come through. There's a big class divide in the GOP right now, and it's gonna be a real challenge for Romney coming up in this campaign, because some of Romney's problems are, he's the evangelical communities. He's a Mormon. I'll tell you, I don't care what anybody says about the fact that he's a Mormon and it shouldn't matter. You go to these evangelical communities, it really matters he's a Mormon, and they won't say it directly. They won't say it directly, but they'll say, well, he's a Mormon, and that doesn't really bother me, but I have friends who that would really offend. And that's a way of getting at the fact that they're just not comfortable with him being a Mormon. Here's looking at the data. So what we did with these is we looked at counties that were above and below the statewide median income average, or statewide median in income. All these places here that were, all these places that are higher than the median, Romney does well. If it's lower than the statewide median, Santorum did well. This is a class divide. This is a class divide that's about economics. And it's going on inside of the GOP, which makes you think, what's that going to be in the fall, right? When we actually have a Democratic candidate. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it's going to be. It's hard to, you can't take stuff from the primary season and say for certain what it's going to mean. But it says to me that there's something big that we've been able to see with this project using data. There's a big shift underway in the United States right now. And this campaign is really, I think 2008 was the first campaign where the economic collapse really caught a lot of people. I was on the road when it was happening. And I was actually in a wealthy community when McCain, I don't know how many people paid close attention in 2008, but when McCain suspended the campaign because he felt they had to go back to Washington and fix the economy. I was in a wealthy community where people were very well educated, very wealthy, and when he did that, they just basically threw up their hands and they decided they weren't going to vote for McCain. It was clear. He lost, McCain lost the money burbs by 12 percentage points to Barack Obama. Democrats, the money burbs have been trending Democratic for the past several elections. So Gore won them by about 3 percentage points, and Kerry won them by only 1 percentage point. It was closer. But then Obama won by 12 percentage points. You can argue that's where he won the entire election. Those places, when they saw what McCain did, that was kind of the last straw. They were probably going to go with Obama anyway because they weren't pleased with the direction that Bush had taken the economy, that Bush had taken the country, and they were going to flip back. They flipped back hard. But that was kind of the last straw. But 2008 was just the beginning of it. In 2012, I think what we're going to see is those money burbs will be closer again. I think Obama will win them by a bit more than Kerry did, or maybe even Gore did. But that's going to decide the election. Who does well in those places? The thing that's going to be very interesting to watch, as far as I'm concerned, are these places. These service worker centers. These places they really kind of, they don't do very well. They've not done very well in the recession, and they've been hit really hard. And when the populist uprising you see right now, the Tea Party and that stuff, the Tea Party was really a populist uprising. It wasn't. It was a populist uprising where people were talking about, oh, we're angry at the government, but we still don't think you should raise taxes on people that make over $250,000 a year. That's not a populist movement by definition. Right? Populist by definition, and that's not a liberal point of view. Populists hate all people in power. That's the point of being a populist. You hate people with power and control, includes people in law. That wasn't a true populist movement. I think you could argue the Occupy thing, it's the same thing. The Occupy movement is the democratic, kind of flip of that. It's kind of the democratic view that they don't like what business has done. Interestingly, those Occupy movements were primarily based in the industrial metropolises. They were all in big cities. I know that they were scattered all around the country, but the biggest movement was in these big cities. The Tea Party movement was based all around the country, but you had the strongest affiliations in these communities, these boom towns. These boom towns are places that experienced rapid growth in the first half of the last decade, and then, basically watched the housing market collapse. And when it collapsed, it really hit these places hard. A lot of people in these communities are underwater, and they're struggling. A prototypical boom town is Clark County, where Las Vegas is. They're really, really strong. I mean, I can't believe they're building there again, but they are. But everybody's underwater. It's just a sea of foreclosures, and that kind of prompted the Tea Party thing. But when you really are going to see something is when you see the populist movement hit these places. Because these places really have a right to be angry about a lot of things. These places, and I would argue, I guess you can add into it, let's do it this way. These places and these places, maybe too. Okay. These places are really being left behind. Okay. But the way the economy is moving, these places are being left behind. And at some point, they're going to be very angry, and they're going to start voting for things that people aren't going to like. They're going to start doing things that are going to make people very nervous, people in power, just because that's what populist movements really do. Populist movements are about one party or another. They're about people that are upset with the status quo, particularly upset with people in power. When it hits these places, and I think it's still gonna take some time. It's gonna be 2016 or after. That's when politics in America is gonna get really interesting. Maybe a little scary, but not. Don't worry, we'll all come up. Okay, sure. The point is, these kind of broad observational looks at what's happening, they're not just based on, as a lot of, look, I live in Washington. There are a lot of people who make money as analysts, and God bless them. They go on TV and just say what they think. I'm not telling you what I think, right? I'm not. I'm telling you what I'm telling you based on the numbers that I see for all these places. And I visit these places. I have one community for each one of these 12 types. And I go and I visit them, and I talk to people, and I kind of take the temperature of the community, and I get a sense of what's going on. Data ultimately, when you use it the right way, you shape it the right way, yields a whole bunch of stuff. It's the beginning of a way of looking at the country in different ways, and it's the beginning of a way to tell stories in ways we haven't in the past. And we need that. We need new ways of telling stories, because the country is evolving and it's changing, and actually it's disintegrating somewhat. And then we like to think that what's happening in America is that the web is making it so that community doesn't matter anymore because you can live in rural Nebraska and the morning paper can be the New York Times. And that's true. If you have a web connection, the New York Times can be your morning paper wherever you live. That's just, most people don't do that, right? What's really happening is these communities that are experiencing different kinds of things are going off in different directions. And they're going to start pulling the country apart in these different ways, and you need ways to dig in and look at that. And you can't just go to Peoria, or you can't just get in the car, which we do too much, and just say, I'm going to go to this town, or I'm going to go to where the factory closed. What this gives you, what data gives you, is a way to say, I'm going to go to the place where the factory closed, and I'm going to tell you why it's like a lot of other places where factories are closed, and why this is something that's bigger than just this place. It's about all these kinds of places in the country. That's what data can do for you. Data isn't just about graphics and nice maps, which, we have some decent maps. It's about having those data there to back up ideas, to help you understand something better, and then tell the story. That's what I think. I mean, that's why I do what I do. And I think we're just really still at the beginning of what we can do with this. I was talking to Cindy today about some plans we have. There's so much you can do with that. There's so much you can do with it if you're smart. And you don't just do the graph or the fever line chart that just like you need because you need art for your story, right? You dig into the data and it'll give you more stories than you ever could have possibly imagined. And let me take some questions from you and see what you have to say. Yeah.
One of my favorite websites is 5forward.com by Nick Silver. I'm sure you're familiar with them. And one of the things that he has said, more or less, is that true independent voters are actually a pretty small sliver of the voting population, and they usually have allegiances that are either strong or weaker toward one party or another. So I've got a two-part question. Part one is, do you see some of these community types maybe starting to shift in allegiance one to the other? And the second part of the question is, do you think that the community types who do prefer one party over the other, do you think that that party strategy is going to be more about trying to win over votes from those other communities, or more about turnout?
Those are good questions. I mean, it's really about both, right? I mean, if you, because you could really argue that George Bush won in 2004 by driving up turnout in places that were solidly Republican, right? So he didn't have to win Cleveland in the suburbs. I mean, I think he did win a lot. He didn't win quite all, obviously, for Cleveland, the county for Cleveland. But he did fairly well in the suburbs turnout. But he really won by driving up the vote. He really won by driving up the vote out through here, and some over here. This is really how Bush won. This is how Bush won the 2004 election. He did it all. He did it all in driving up the turnout from places that are reliably Republican. If you were to ask me about these places switching, I can tell you right now, with pretty good certainty, where 9 of those 12 which candidate 9 of those 12 community types will vote for. I mean, Nate's right in that I can, okay, they'll go Republican, they'll go Democratic, they'll go Republican, they'll go Republican. There could be close there. They'll go heavily Democratic, they'll go Republican. Could be close here, that's because these communities are large African American populations, and they really are split. It's just like the white voters tend to go for the Republican, the black voters tend to go for the Democrat. And it's about what the white voters do. These places will probably go Democratic. The question is how much. That'll probably determine the election. These places are obviously going to go Republican, and Republican. But that's now, right? I do think that over, watching the data for me over the next decade, and I want to keep doing this for a while, and I think I'm going to be able to, is going to be about what happens in these places. Again, it's going to be about what happens in the service worker centers over time. Because there's every reason, look, like these places will never switch. Because it's not about, the data in those places tells me that those voters don't really care about the economy very much. Ultimately, they're about social issues. But these places here, and the emptying nests, those places, they both tend to lean Republican, and they both tend to dislike, government and elites, but there's not the strong, the same religious component isn't there. And again, this isn't my silly analysis, or not silly, but my kind of let me take the temperature of America analysis. This is what the numbers say, okay? These places are conservative, and they are somewhat socially conservative, but they do not have the same strength of religious pull, holding people to the party. Those places could switch. They really could. Those places could switch. The money birds could switch. They've been trending Democratic for a while. The problem with them is for the Republicans to win those places. Most Americans, by the way, live in the money birds. It's about 67 million people. The Republicans could win those places, but they have real problems. And you've watched them kind of unfold during the Republican primary, where, and it cracks me up. Like, I was raised Catholic. I was raised a good Catholic boy. I don't know why anymore. But the idea that like birth control, I wonder how Catholics are going to think about that. It's like, are you freaking kidding me? Catholics, not every Catholic family has 8 kids in it, right? So somebody must be practicing birth control. And these places in particular, these money birds, the issue will not fly there. It will not fly there. You cannot go in there, and it's not just about women, because some women actually really like Santorum. And it depends on where you go. It really does. If you go out here, these evangelical communities, I don't have the polling data on this. I do have some. I'm able to look at polling data with this, and I get polling data from Pew. I know people over there pretty well, and they give me their raw data, and it's all zip code. It's all got zip codes. It's all coded for zip codes, so we know where the calls are coming from and who's answering the questions, not who they are, but where they live. So we can assign them to community types. So whenever I get a Pew sample that's big enough, I can blow it out and say, this is the Obama approval rating in these places, this is the Obama approval rating in these places, and then I can start to make, suppositions about looking at a whole bunch of other data, employment, gas prices, stock market, why places are going the way they're going. The problem the GOP has is they need to appeal to win the primaries. You have to appeal to these people. You have to appeal to these people. You have to appeal to these people. And to win the general, everybody has to appeal to these people, right? To win the general, you've got to appeal to the money burbs, and it's a different kind of. It's increasingly the urban-rural divide in America is that the urban places are trending, particularly to be more socially liberal, and that's true of the places that Democrats win are these places. Consistently, Democrats win these places, and these places, and then they win enough of those places. Those places all tend to be socially liberal. That's the challenge that the GOP is going to have to actually try to win over the burbs over the long haul. I'm babbling, sorry, too long. Next question.
Do you think, how big an issue do you think healthcare is going to be? That again, it's a 2 questions. Healthcare is going to be in the elections. And secondly, it's kind of scary the way you were talking about what you might think would happen in the future, especially in the elections in 2016. I mean, if we promise never to quote you, would you expel?
I don't know what's going to happen in 2016. The one thing I know is this. Like, I will say this, and I can say this, and again, the data shows me this. Okay, this idea that anybody's going to fix the economy is it's bull. Nobody's going to fix it. They're not, because it's about a whole bunch of underlying factors that are about consumer confidence and 2/3 of the U.S. economy is consumer spending. When the economy is going to turn around, when people start feeling confident enough to go to Starbucks, and go to Target on the weekend, Walmart, and buy tube socks every weekend, right? It needs something like that, and that puts money in those people's pockets and gets the economy moving again. People are scared, right? Because they sense that something bigger is going on, and so the economy isn't going to be fixed. Though I know that if we can just put more money in the hands of the job creators, it'll all turn around. It's just not true. It's not true. And the other side isn't true either. It's like Santorum's out there saying we're going to bring manufacturing back. You're not going to bring manufacturing. It's just not possible. I mean, you could bring manufacturing back, and that we could make more things here. I mean, I've looked at the manufacturing numbers. The trend inexorably in the last 30 years, 40 years is down. The number of people working in manufacturing. And even as we produce more stuff here, we use fewer and fewer people to do it, right? So when I look ahead to those things, that's what I mean about there will be some kind of populist uprising just because, and that's not just it's not just me thinking that. It's just, look, eventually people get angry, and they're going to want something done. And the bottom line is there is no quick fix for them. Whenever we have an election every 4 years, everybody's like, I've got the answer. If it were really that simple, we would have fixed it. You know, in all seriousness, it's not like Romney's got his book and it's like, oh, once we enact this, it's all it's going to turn around so fast. No, it's not. That's not the way it really works. And again, when you get deeper in the data, you see all that stuff because you begin to understand. It's like, look, it won't work. The numbers here tell me that people have to start spending money again. And you know, the election of Mitt Romney is not going to suddenly have people feeling. We'll have some people feeling much better. We'll have some people feeling much worse. Healthcare. I actually looked at healthcare. You can get data from the census about the number of people with and without healthcare in the country by county. So this is a map of who does and doesn't have healthcare, right? So you can see the bar on the top. When you get to that dark orange area, that's a lot of people in Texas don't have healthcare. And the gray area, gray areas people where communities people do have healthcare. This is where data gets really tricky, though, right? So you look at this and you think like, oh, well, that's easy. Obviously, all the places that don't have healthcare would be in favor of the Obama healthcare plan because they're going to get healthcare, right? No, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way because here we have this map broken into these types, right? So campus and careers, where a lot of kids are still on their parents' younger people are still on their parents' health insurance, and you have a very low number of people who are uninsured. The lowest of all the types here, the lowest number. But these people, these communities, it's really interesting because we looked at this Pew data to see who supports, right? They asked them if you support the Obama healthcare plan. These places, they don't really care because, to be honest, like if you're young and in college, you're not really, unless maybe you're a senior, you're not really thinking about what your healthcare situation is. These people care a lot, and the money burns. But their healthcare situation, they tend to do pretty well in terms of who has. They support Obama's healthcare by a small margin, his plan, and most people there have insurance. You get up here, those evangelical epicenters, 20% of the people there don't have health insurance. They are dead set against the Obama healthcare plan, and it's because for them it's a matter of right and wrong. They just think that is the wrong thing to do. They can't abide it, right? So what is it going to mean for the election? I don't know. Because I think when you start breaking it down and you look at it in different parts of it, like the individual mandate, I think it's really going to be how it's framed. I can tell you right now that the evangelical epicenters, if you say Obamacare anywhere near them, that's gold. You'll get a lot of votes there if you're a Republican and you say Obamacare. And I think that if you go to the industrial metropolises, the big cities, Obamacare, I think I know this from the Pewniverse, actually. So this is the chart. I do a chart every week for the Wall Street Journal. And then I get to write something about it. What I write is a lot better because it's my writing, but also because it gives you more space to say something. And you can see when you really dig into it, it's just a really complicated issue. I'm not sure when I look at the healthcare data, when I look at where the uninsured are, and then I look at the poll numbers on it, it just looks to me like it's not an issue that really, except for like the evangelical communities or the places that strongly support Obama healthcare. It's really hard to figure out how it moves voters. I'm not sure. It could just be a big wash because you got to be careful with what you say in one place because it could be heard people in other places. So it gets pretty tricky. Next question. Yep.
What kind of challenges did you face when you first started working with these data-dominated projects?
Well, since I worked for the Project for Excellence in Journalism, I had an idea when I was there. It was my first iteration of this. We could never do it. But my thought was, why don't we look at media consumption habits by community? Actually, I didn't realize, it is this project, but just based on media consumption. If we looked at media consumption habits, and we could create types for media consumption habits, and then we could go to those places, and then we could look at how it affects the way they govern themselves, the way they see the world. The biggest challenge you have whenever you get into a big data set like this is you've got to go into everything. I think it's personal. You've got to go into everything with completely open mind. And like when I write about these places, I obviously have my own personal opinions. Anybody who's a journalist who says they don't have personal opinions, it's Len Downey, who used to be managing editor of the Washington Post, said he didn't allow himself to take sides on it. He didn't get to the level of thinking where he took sides in a political election, because as a journalist he was not supposed to have any opinions. I don't even think that's the right thing to do. I think you should have opinions. As a journalist, you learn a lot of stuff. You take all of it in, and hopefully you're thinking at a level where you're making decisions about it. But when you do a project like this, you can't, there can be no preconceptions. When you write about something, it cannot be that anybody's right or wrong, regardless of what you think. I'm telling you about the world through their eyes, through the eyes of these places. So when you go to talk to somebody in one of these communities, I went to this evangelical community, you know, and I had a minister say some really weird stuff to me, and I completely disagree with everything he said, but it was really interesting. I took notes and I wrote it sympathetically from his point of view, because this is the way he sees the world. And that's the trickiest part. The trickiest part is extricating yourself from it. Because that's when you put yourself more in the middle of it is when you read the data in the project. Because when you go in with preconceived notions and it's like, oh, these people are doing that because they're stupid, and obviously the smart thing to do is the thing that I think, then you're shortchanging them, and you're not doing your job. And I think it's one of the biggest problems you have whenever you do data is stepping outside of your own preconceived notions and things, and just there's a difference between going in and saying, I have to answer this question, and I want to understand what's going on here, and letting it tell you a story, and dictating the story. You can't dictate the story. You gotta come up with a question, get the answer, and then let the people tell the story, let them understand the story.
In regards to starting to work with the Project for Excellence in Journalism, did you notice a change in readership of your articles or any feedback? Good or bad feedback?
It was a different part of it. I was younger when I worked for the Project for Excellence in Journalism, and honest to God, I came up with this idea because I couldn't stand doing it anymore. In 2007, at the end of 2007, I was burned out because the Project for Excellence in Journalism, the story of media transformation in the United States is a very hard story to tell after a while. If you're a journalist, it gets a little depressing. And that doesn't mean that it's done. I think it'll actually work. We're going through a really rocky period, and eventually we'll come out with something else. And we're in the process of doing that right now. But to every year read about audience declines and ad dollar drop-offs and newsroom cuts, after a while I just couldn't do it anymore.
Well, what about online? It's like site visits.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Yeah, right, but I work for the Project for Excellence in Journalism, so I know there's no money there, which is the problem. But there will be. And we're experimenting with models that will make money. The media are experimenting with models that make money. When it comes to does it affect the way I look at page views and things like that, I am really lucky in that I came up with this idea to let you know how I did this. So you don't just come up with this idea and then I just built this site. I didn't do that. I wouldn't know how to do that. I came up with this idea, and I talked to some people about it, and I shopped it around town. I talked to the Washington Post, I talked to Politico, I talked to the Christian Science Monitor, I talked to the National Journal, I talked to all these people and had multiple meetings with all of them. Except for the National Journal. National Journal was back and forth with emails, but Washington Post, I went out and met with them 3 times. And finally, I was leaving, and they're like, we just don't have the money to do this right now. And as I was walking out the door, the guy was standing at the door, and he said, you know what you should do with this? You should go and get a grant for this from the Knight Foundation. You should go get a grant from the Knight Foundation, then come back to us when you have money, because we really want to do this. And I was like, okay, fine. So I just knocked on the Knight Foundation door, and they gave me a bunch of money. That's not really how it works. What really happens is it's a very long process. So I realized that guy was right, and that's what I should be doing. So then I went through a very long process of reaching out to the Knight Foundation, going back and forth on the idea, submitting a formal proposal, and then getting kind of okay. But they gave me we can't say we're going to fund this. It works like this. We can't say we're going to fund this for sure. But if you were to find a media partner, we would be very inclined to fund this. So then you have to kind of walk over to. Then I walked over to Politico and said, so I've talked to these people at the Knight Foundation. I went back to the Post, by the way, after that, and it was too late because it takes a long time. Lining up grant funding takes a while. So it's months later. I go back to the Post and say, hey, guess what? the Knight Foundation wants to fund this thing. I'm like, oh, they're like, Art, 2008, all our people are allocated, we can't do this now. So I went over to Politico, which at the time was a startup, and Politico, I got all the way to the point where we were ready to pull the trigger, and then they had to kick it up to their board of directors, and then they came back down and said, we can't say yes or no on this until September, because that was their official 1 year anniversary. But like their official 1 year anniversary wasn't for another month, and that was when they formally were going to be graded by the board of directors on what happened next. So I went back to the Christian Science Monitor, I flew up there and had a lunch, I told them about it, and they signed up. But it's a long process of lining up the money to do something with this, and then you line up the money. The first thing I did was, I came up with the idea, I found a professor through connections that I went to him and said, this is what I want to do, is it even possible? And he said yes, and we talked about what we should use. We decided to use counties because, some people don't like counties because they're still too big. And we've talked about zip codes for a little bit, but there are something like 50,000 zip codes in the United States. If you think that map, if you think this map with 12 colors on it is complicated, imagine that with 50,000 zip codes. It would just be impossible. The counties are really nice. So once I found out that, because there's a lot of data on them, and they're much better than congressional districts, usually 435. So, once I knew it worked and we had the data set to work on, then I went and got the money. And then once I had the money, somebody had to build the site. It's a lot of work.
How far back does your data go? Look, I heard you say the trend is that these different communities are pulling apart over time. Is that trend accelerating? And then what do you think is causing that to happen?
Well, we have, the nice thing about once you break down the country this way, if you can get any data by county from any period of time, or even by zip code, if I can get data by zip code, I can just aggregate it. We have a program that aggregates it up to county, and so we can aggregate the zip codes up to counties, and then we can take 10. So, this is the vote for Reagan, right, in 1980, right, and then this is the vote using the same scale, I hope anyway, for Bush in 2004, and John McCain in 2008. So you can look at what happened in that period of time. Here's Carter versus Gore. So any kind of data. So for the Atlantic thing. So for the Atlantic, I'll show you that. So for the Atlantic, they contacted me and said, "Do you want to do something?" And I said, we could do median household income over time and look at how it's changed. And I didn't know how it was going to shake out. I didn't, but I knew the data existed. Let's see. But I knew that the data existed, so we could build. So once you know the data exists, I knew the 2010 data existed. I knew the 1980 data existed. Then once you have that, you can do it to break down anything. So we could go as far back as 1940. The categories wouldn't make any sense then. I don't even know. Probably 1940, a lot of those money burbs would just be trees. But but I think you go back to like 1980. There have been changes over time, and some of them have changed a lot probably. But when you get around the big cities and those wealthy suburban areas, I think you can say a lot about them. Now I think the income. What's really interesting about some of these income numbers is. Because this is comparing, so the boomtowns probably have experienced, I would argue probably have experienced the most change since 1980, because a lot of these places had rapid growth just in 2000, so in 1980 they were very different places. But even with the rapid growth they've only had a small increase of wealth in terms of real dollars, right? And where you see the real increases are the burbs. I think you see it in the industrial metros. You see a good bump there. But what's really interesting is these service worker centers have shrunken, right? They've generally gotten smaller since 1980. The younger people have left. That's definitely true of Tractor Country. Tractor Country has lost a lot of people, and they've seen a drop in income. I can do it with, basically, I don't think I'd feel real comfortable going back with these types before 1980, but if you were just looking at county data, you could go back to, 1900, whatever you want. Once you create the framework, you can take the data and put it in.
You're mentioning that you had originally started with guy did looking at media consumption, and made me think that maybe put some kind of connection between media consumption habits and some of these trends we're seeing.
Yeah, actually, we did that. You know, the reason we ended up not doing that project when I was at the Project for Excellence in Journalism was that it's a really bad time to try to do that project because media consumption habits are changing rapidly, right? So if it's really going to be who's watching the evening news now compared to 10 years ago, we've been big shifts, huge shifts, mostly declines, obviously. But so the consumption